this project, I want me and my brothers and sister to each tell a basic history of our parents. We've heard stories from our parents, but I'm sure there are facts we got wrong. So I think it will be funny to interview everybody about our parents' lives, and then to interview our parents to see what we got right and what we got wrong.
Dad, Charles Irvin.
Charles Irvin Strickland.
Irving,
I think.
My father is Charles Irvin Strickland.
Born in Elkton, Maryland.
Dad was born in Maryland.
Dad was born in Bethesda, Maryland.
They lived in Elkland.
Elkton, Maryland. And I think probably those first years was all in Elkton.
Lived in Elkton, Maryland until 8 years old.
Dad has 2 brothers and a sister. Oldest being Bob.
First child was, I think, Bob.
Bob Dusseldorf Strickland.
No, Kathleen's the oldest.
Kathleen. Karen Strickland.
And then Fred Strickland.
Fred Strickland. He doesn't have a middle name. I don't know why.
Fred was the middle child and Dad was the youngest.
Fred, my oldest brother, was first. He's 5 years my senior. He would have been born in 1942. Kathleen a couple years later. Bob in 1946, and me in 1947. We were just a year apart.
Helen Strickland was his mom. Pop-Op, I don't know what his actual name was. Oh, Stuart Strickland is his dad.
Dad's parents are Helen and Stuart.
Stuart Irvin. No, that's Dad's middle name. Stuart Strickland and Helen Bostwick something Strickland.
Parents were Stuart and Helen.
My dad's name is Stuart Cooper Strickland. And my mom, Helen Bostwick, that was her maiden name, Strickland.
His father was Stuart Strickland, who he was a military man.
He was in the military in World War II. He was in, I think for a short time, in the Army Air Corps. By the end of World War II, there was no Army Air Corps. I think it was just the Air Force by that time. And sometime he was in the Signal Corps. I can remember seeing a Signal Corps emblem on one of his uniform pictures.
Who, when he left the Army, he became a computer engineer. And he worked for IBM, and he did work for NASA.
I know Pop Strickland worked for IBM, so he moved around a lot.
He worked at IBM his whole life.
My dad worked for IBM 35 years. He began with them probably in the late 40s, early 50s as some kind of an electrical engineer.
Helen was probably a stay-at-home mom until the kids got in school, and then she was the school secretary.
Either she was a secretary or she was just a stay-at-home mom.
My mother, while they were still living back there and before marriage, she did secretary work, I think, in Newark, Delaware, possibly Wilmington. Both were close to where we lived in Maryland.
I do remember hearing stories that when my grandmother was very young, she was very pretty, and she got voted at her school prettiest girl in school. But all of her brothers were very mean to her and always saying awful things and jokes. So when she won the award for prettiest girl in school, she didn't believe. She thought they were making fun of her.
Helen was always, she was all dressed up all the time. She wore dresses. Even when they were camping, she wore dresses.
A friend of hers who had a bull needed us to keep track of it while her friend went somewhere. And the story is that there was a gravel pit out behind her house, and the bolt got stuck in it. Mom had to go get it. So that's supposed to give you some insight to my mother's person. She was the person who got things done.
Okay.
My dad was too.
I don't know how they met.
Okay, they met well, Pop was working on the space shuttle, doing computers for it, and she was like, "Oh, look at how smart that computer guy is," and then they fell in love and got married.
I don't know how they met, but Northeast Maryland and Elkton were just down the road from each other, a few miles. They might have met at church, I don't know where.
He was born, he started talking when he was 1.
And then he moved to 20 other places.
By the time he got to school, they were transferring around quite a lot.
I don't know how much he moved around before he was 10.
My dad, being in management in IBM, much like military people, we got moved every 2 or 3 years to go somewhere else.
There was one time they were pretty close to moving to Osaka, Japan. There's Osaka, where I'm at now. There's an IBM branch of Japan.
There was a farm. Everybody grew up on a farm.
We lived on 5 acres of land. It wasn't a farm, but we raised fowl, ducks, geese. I'm told we had some guinea.
There was also New York. Did he ever live in the Catskills?
That move was from Elkton, Maryland to Woodstock, New York, in the Catskills.
And my dad had a cousin that he was his closest friend, his cousin Bobby.
No, yeah, I know Bobby Blake was his cousin, and I know he was a bad kid.
He and cousin Bobby had a BB gun.
Once he had a toy gun.
And they would hide in the tree and they would shoot BBs at cars.
If you're talking about shooting BBs at someone?
And one time they broke a window and they had to hide in the tree all day.
And he shot it and got arrested.
And they never got in trouble for that one.
I think they let him go with a warning. But he said he'd never do that again.
Bob and I had a room on the 3rd floor of that. There was a carpenter that nobody liked, or we didn't like. And I can remember one time we had a pellet gun or something. I think it might have been a BB gun. And the carpenter was out at his truck, and he was facing away from us and bending into the back of his truck to get some tools or something. And surely it had to be Bob's idea, but anyway, we fired him and shot him at the back end, and it seemed to irritate him, but he didn't know where it came from.
Another story I remember my dad told me is he was really, really young, and my grandfather was going to work, and every morning he had an orange juice that he drank that was it was in the refrigerator, and he would always shake up the juice and he would drink it and go to work. And one morning he put on the suit, and he didn't know that my dad had actually wanted to try the orange juice. So he opened up the orange juice and he drank some and he put it back in the fridge, because you're not supposed to drink your father's orange juice. So he put it back in the fridge so he wouldn't get found out. And he didn't close the cap very tightly. So when my grandpa went to shake the juice, it popped open and got all over his suit. And he was a stern fellow and very unhappy about that.
And obviously, Dad was in charge of everything.
My grandfather also, he would play the violin, and he wanted everybody to be musical. So he forced my father to play the trumpet.
And his mom made him learn the trumpet.
And now my dad is very musical, and he plays every instrument except for the trumpet.
He loved to play baseball.
And he liked baseball and hated school.
And then he turned 10, and he played a lot of baseball.
From when he was a baby to the time he was 10 years old. I remembered one more thing. He was a very short kid.